Blog Talk Radio.
It is Saturday morning, oh my goodness, at 11 o'clock, and you all know what that means. It is House Talk Pregame Family, and I am your empowerment coach and international inspirational speaker, Dr. Lauren Pitts. And to say that I'm excited is an understatement. Our listeners, I wish that you could hear the conversation that we were having in the studio before we came on the air. Oh my goodness, what a show we have for you today. I have with me two of my three co-hosts on pregame, former scholar athletes Jared Johnston from Bowie State and Ronnie Ransom from Virginia State. Hopefully, we have our fingers crossed that before the end of football season, my man-child, Andre Garlick from Drexel University, will be joining us. And if he doesn't make it before the end of football season, you will get to hear from him at some point in time on the air, regardless of what athletic season we're in. Look, folks, House Talk Pregame is all about family and showing much love to our HBCU family, in particular, our student and professional athletes and their families as well. And speaking of family, our House Talk Pregame family has grown, and we are now a part of the Heritage Sports Radio Network family, and you'll be able to check us out on HSRN real soon. Jared.
Yeah, good morning, everybody. Hope you guys are doing good on this homecoming season in the HBCU land. I know a lot of people are missing their homecoming Saturdays with everything that comes with it. So, again, we're another outlet to bring you guys, some answers to talk football, to talk life outside of football, to give you guys that HBCU feel while we are on the radio. We know that right now sometimes are still trying. Things are getting a little better, but things are still up in the air. So we're here to, help you guys as much as we can. We know some of you guys may be tired with what's going on, but we're here for you guys, like I said, as an outlet to take away from that, and it's time to optimize it. Let's get it. Ronnie?
Thank you, Jared. Good morning, everybody. Like Jared said, it is homecoming weekend it was supposed to be homecoming weekend for a lot of HBCUs, so, pray for us as we're going through this time, not seeing our families and our alumni brothers and sisters. But during the show today, we will be taking call-in questions and comments by simply dialing direct at 515-605-9744 or email your HBCU shout-outs, questions, or comments to htpregame@gmail.com. Back to you, Dr. Pitts.
So, look, folks, we're going to shake it up a little bit today. And before we get into our discussion on today's topics and what have you, look, we received such a tremendous response to our topic last week that it created all these thought-provoking questions and what have you. So in a minute, we're actually going to do a recap of last week's show. And we had some additional dialogue, if you will, that we want to add to that discussion. But before we do that, we concluded last week's show, and I found myself sort of troubled or stirring on the inside, if you will. One of the things that I am guilty of and take full responsibility and accountability for is that there are times where, depending on what I'm talking about, particularly if it's something that I'm really, really passionate about, I come really, 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 really hard. I come really hard, and I can be rather harsh in my delivery at times. So I wanted to sort of clean up and make amends, if you will, for my delivery last week on a couple of things. And let me first start by saying this. I don't apologize for what I said. I think that what I said needed to be said. What I do apologize is for the harsh manner in which I delivered my perspective on the matter. And what I'm talking about is when I made the comment about children in the learning environment engaging in all of these maladaptive behaviors and being a disruption in the learning environment. And then here comes their ghetto fabulous mama in the bedroom, slippers with the comb in the back of her hair, smacking gum with the two little tights on and all of that. This is what I want to say about that. It is never my intention to belittle, degrade, demean, or tear down anybody. So I apologize if the way that I conveyed my disapproval of that type of conduct, if it offended anyone. I want to say this, though. I truly believe that children are products of their environment. I want to pose this challenge to those individuals whom I may have offended, or if you know someone who fits the characteristics of that person that I harshly described. And my question to you is this: what do you value? Do you know your worth? And the reason why I ask that is because when we, in particular, as women of color, and even as men of color, when we know our worth, when we know with certainty who we are, truly who we are, I believe that it becomes virtually impossible to be okay with conducting oneself in a manner that reinforces the negative labels and stereotype that the dominant culture and so many others place upon us. We are better than this. We are capable of greatness and excellence. And I recognize that there are circumstances and situations and traumatic events that have impacted how individuals carry themselves, how they view others, and how they perceive the world in which they live. However, there are enough of us, whether it be within the community, on TV, on radio, or wherever, that are providing appropriate examples of what acceptable, what we clinically call pro-social behaviors should look like. We have got to do a better job as a people of carrying ourselves with dignity and pride and respect that yields the respect that we are entitled to and have been deprived of for hundreds of years. Respect is not demanded, it is earned. And we have to take responsibility and accountability for the messages that we are sending each other and our children as to what appropriate conduct looks like in our communities, in our society at large. Now, as I said in the very beginning, last week's show has generated an exorbitant amount of additional discussion and thought-provoking chatter that we want to take the next 10 to 15 minutes or so and speak to, and then we will move on with today's show. Ronnie and Jared, I know just based on the feedback that you all received and the additional discussions we've had, we have some more to talk about, don't we?
Absolutely. One of the things, like most people know, I wasn't a part of the show last week. Sorry I missed everybody, but I'm glad to be back this week. But when I had listened to the replay of the episode, the call-in speaker, when he was engaging with Dr. Pitts and Jared, he made some very interesting takes and comments that, just had me thinking. And then just listening to Dr. Pitts, clarify her statements from last week, talking about, families who live in impoverished areas or, underserving areas. One of the things that always come to mind to me when I think about just self-awareness and self-development, and Dr. Pitts, you'll be familiar with this, it's a scale called Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs, and it was created by Abraham Maslow, who was an American psychologist. And I'll just give a quick description of Maslow's Hierarchy of Needs. Basically, it's a pyramid-style shape where it has different needs to reach self-awareness and self-actualization. And at the bottom of that, the bottom two rows of the pyramid is what we call basic needs. And those are psychological needs, which is food, water, warmth, and rest. Then you have safety needs, meaning security and safety. And that is the basis of the foundation for that pyramid. If you do not have those, if you haven't experienced that as a child growing up, then you'll run into problems such as having separation anxiety, reactive attachment disorder, oppositional defiance, things like that, where you don't feel safe and secure in your own environment because you weren't given that opportunity. After that, you have psychological needs such as belongingness and love needs, meaning intimate relationships and friends, esteem needs, which is prestige, feeling of accomplishment. And then at the very top, once you have reached those four levels, the top level is self-actualization, which Dr. Pitts was, referencing to, when we talk about people who live in these communities, being able to develop a sense of self-awareness and self-actualization in order to get out of those environments and do better for their life. And, part of mental health, we tell people that, loving yourself first is most important before you can accept anybody else's love and caring. And oftentimes a lot of people in those areas don't experience that from their parents, families, and things like that. So it is kind of hard, for somebody from the outside looking in to sit there and say, oh, well, they should get out of that environment. They should be able to do better for themselves. But if that's never been exposed to you, if you never experienced that, that makes it extremely difficult. And I'll let Jared go next, and then I'll come back to my second point about what the call-in guest had made last week.
Right. Yeah, I agree with what both of you guys said. And again, of course, we didn't mean anything to degrade anybody or anything like that, but it just, is what it is. It's the reality of the situation that we're in right now in America. And just hitting on what Ronnie had foreshadowed as far as the other topic that had came up from our calling guest, which, brought on a lot of great points. Really, was a pleasure having him call in. But it was another statement about some athletes, African-American athletes, making it to, the professional level, becoming a highly paid professional athlete, and the aspect of reparations being paid from them to the rest of the African-American community. From my perspective, I think that's more so giving back to HBCUs or just giving back to the African-American communities throughout the United States. I don't think it's necessarily giving reparations to every single individual, a certain amount. But I think that, in my opinion, anyone who does make it to a level of, high stature, we can't sit here and say they're obligated to give anything back because it's their money, it's their life. They can do whatever they want with it at the end of the day. But I think we all can say it would be nice to see that type of effort be given towards the black community, especially HBCUs, when you're talking about a lot of HBCUs who are being threatened to shut down. There's obviously money, not even in just the wealthy African Americans, but just as a whole. I think we all need to do better at giving back to our communities and our HBCUs. So that's my take on it.
Absolutely.
Definitely. And just to add my 2 cents on to what Jared was talking about. Yeah, when I heard that comment by the caller, and he gave great dialogue. So we definitely appreciate you calling in, sir. And we hope you're listening today. But when he talked about reparations from professional athletes, and kind of like what Jared was saying, I definitely think as African Americans, and I kind of touched on this a couple weeks ago. We're kind of behind by 400 years when it comes to wealth and having wealth in our communities, partially because we've never been given the opportunity to build those communities for long-lasting generations. People think of Black Wall Street in Tulsa, Oklahoma, when it was bombed in the early 1900s, as that being like the mecca or the staple of Black wealth and Black generational wealth. And that, there was other places around the country too, but a lot of those places were destroyed or burned down or just rioted against, by, white Americans who didn't want to see African Americans prosper in their own communities. So when it comes to, athletes giving reparations and things like that, I've even thought about, former, certain athletes, giving back to certain HBCUs, like adopting HBCUs to give back to. But I also challenge the alumni of these HBCUs too to give back, and that's also one of the bigger issues that we don't necessarily talk about, is the alumni of these HBCUs giving back to their schools. And I always tell people that I think that's the biggest disadvantage from PWIs and HBCUs is PWI alumni. That's kind of taught in their household growing up that, you go to school, you typically go to your parents' school that they went to because they pay, they still pay their dues and they still give donations and stuff like that. And they kind of
love
that, exactly. And as we all know, the boosters at these big schools for student athletes, such as I'll give an example, Alabama's head coach, Nick Saban, the boosters there paid off his $10 million mortgage for his house in Alabama, But Nick Saban delivers. He delivers championships. He delivers results. He puts kids into the pros. So, but the day that stops happening, best believe them boosters going to get them up out of there. We as African Americans can hold it. That's best believe, because it's not the athletic directors or the presidents of those schools who sit there and have an issue with the coaches. It's the boosters, because those boosters are giving millions on millions on millions of dollars every year to these programs. And I always sit there and say, and we can kind of touch on this maybe in another episode about the gentrification of HBCUs, where states are starting to understand that, the HBCUs hold real power. Give you an example. The state of Virginia donated over $300 million to Virginia State and Norfolk State. And while that's a lot of money and those schools can use that money, my concern is, well, what's the catch? What's the return in it for the state? So that, and other HBCUs like Morgan State, their white population and other populations of other races have increased by 13% over the last decade. Howard's population outside of African Americans has increased by, I think, 10 or 15% as well. So these are just things. When we talk about giving reparations from professional athletes or any person who's African American of high stature, these are things we need to do as collective and not just think it's expected. This is something that we should want to do and not just expect to do.
Yeah. To that point, I sort of want to add this. It's related, but not. But I think that it's important when it comes to support. The past 3 days, we have been in our Woman Thou Art Loosed virtual experience conference for church, and one of the things that Bishop features on his foundation's website, which is tdjfoundation.org, is he talks about, it's like when you literally go to the homepage, what pops up in your face, it says there are approximately 2.5 million Black-owned businesses in the United States. That number has risen by more than 30% in the last decade. Corporations, foundations, and major nonprofits that can invest in these companies by doing business with them. And here are a few examples of Black-owned businesses. Essence Magazine, which we all knew, owned Oprah. We knew that. I did not know that the Weather Channel was Black-owned. Urban One, which is the parent company of TV One and Radio One. He also says, consider also supporting nonprofits that champion the rights of African Americans and seek to create opportunities for them, including the NAACP Legal Defense and Educational Fund and the Urban League. And here's something that I loved that I was not aware of. For more information about Black businesses, visit the website of the National Black Chamber of Commerce at https://www.nationalbcc.org/. The reason why I bring that up is because when we talk about the difference between the boosters at the big white schools versus our HBCUs, it ties into what Heritage Sports Radio Network is doing through their family initiative. And that is trying to work collaboratively to better position our HBCUs in the corporate sector and to be able to better prepare and position our graduates from HBCUs to be able to be lucratively and gainfully employed with comparable salaries to our white counterparts. But in addition to that, also encouraging entrepreneurial endeavors among Black and brown persons all over the nation. So I thought that important to do that, because how can we better serve our HBCUs as alumnus is that we need to be able to have the money to do that, right? We need to be able to be financially stable. We need to be able to build wealth. Case in point, Nick Saban's mortgage being paid off. You know, we need to be able to have those same types of experiences and support at our HBCUs. And in order to do that, we need to be better positioned to build wealth. The other thing that I wanted to touch on from last week's discussion, and Lord knows I want you two to chime in on this. I was talking to one of my mentors, and she was saying she is an associate dean at the university where she's employed. And one of the things that she was saying when we were talking about me calling out the HBCU presidents about adding, you know, wealth management and financial management and those types of things to the curriculum, she said, well, they're in the other courses as far as, you know, if you're a finance major or if you're an econ major. So she agreed. Mm-hmm. She agreed that at our HBCUs in particular, the very things where, as it relates to fiscal responsibility and wealth management and everything pertaining to the knowledge that we need to come out of poverty, to break the back of poverty, to shatter the systemic and multi-generational poverty that exists among Black and brown communities all over the nation and all around the world, it comes from education. Bishop said during the conference yesterday, you cannot lead if you do not read. I want to extend that and say we need to be educating ourselves and empowering ourselves where fiscal responsibility and wealth management is concerned. And our HBCUs need to take that seriously and make this not just it doesn't need to be an elective. It needs to be a mandatory course that is part of the curriculum that all incoming freshmen have to take. It needs to be a part of the core standards for the HBCU curriculum. How else are we just going to let folks keep, you know, leaving it up to themselves? No. It needs to be mandated. It needs to be a mandated part of the curriculum. Your thoughts on that, gentlemen?
Yeah, I agree. I think
agree with that.
Go ahead, Ronnie.
Go ahead, Jared. I'm sorry.
Okay, yeah. I agree because when you're talking about, you know, the conversation we had about giving back to the HBCU community, like we said, it has to start somewhere. And if it's not going to start in a household, which better place to start than an institution where you're supposed to be given a substantial amount of knowledge? So that knowledge on finance should be given to you, especially at the highest level of education. So there's no excuse why, you know, our alumni, our future HBCU alumni should not be able to leave their school and have the understanding on how to, you know, financially impact the HBCU that they left and other HBCUs, in the country. So I definitely agree 100%.
Yeah, I agree as well. And to give you an example of something like that, Dr. Pitts, at Liberty University, most of their undergraduate students are there a minimum of 5 years because they dedicated an entire academic year for them to do religious studies. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe they do all of those their freshman year. So they don't even touch whatever if they're undecided, then they haven't decided yet. But for those who have decided what they want to study, they don't even get into that until their sophomore year because they do religious studies their freshman year. And another thing, to kind of challenge, I do agree that HBCU should have that a part of their curriculum, but I also challenge parents. You should also, if you are educated on it, you should also teach your children these things. And oftentimes we look to schools to be the parent and teachers at the same time. And we have to kind of get out of that mindset. Parents, it is your responsibility to prepare your children to become adults in the real world. Now, of course, when they're younger and things like that, of course, you want them to be children, playing things like that. But if you're educated on these things like financial advice, having a business, owning a business, looking at other things, this is something that you should also teach your children and not just rely on public schools, private schools, whatever the case may be, to teach your children these skills as well.
I think, to your point, I wholeheartedly agree, Ronnie. I think the challenge, and it's why we, and I know there's people that disagree with it. It takes a whole village to raise a child. But I think that part of the barrier that we find with that is when you look within Black and brown communities, one of the systemic issues that we have, right, is this multi-generational presence of welfare. And, it reminds me of when I was still teaching high school, and after class one day, I noticed that one of my students who was normally very engaged she presented as really distressed. So I kept her after class to talk to her, and she just burst into tears. And I'm like, honey, what's wrong? Now, mind you, she was 15 years old in the 10th grade. And she said that her mom told her that it was time for her to get pregnant because they needed that welfare check, them additional food stamps, and that WIC. And she cried her face off because her words, she said, Dr. Pitts, you told me that you would help me to get to college. I don't want to have a baby. I want to go to college. I want to get the heck out of Salem, New Jersey. I don't want to do that. I don't want to do what everybody else in my family is doing. So my point to that is
that's tough.
We have just generation upon generation upon generation upon generation of an enslaved paradigm that says that that's as good as it gets. And that limited way of thinking, that residual effect of slavery that is ever present in the thought processes of so many of our people in impoverished communities all over the country is further being perpetuated, and these children are not being encouraged or encouraged in any way to do anything more or different or better. And that's why I challenge that. I challenge that paradigm, and I say, we understand that it's systemic. We understand that people are products of their environment. What I struggle with and what infuriates me is that the system is so broken that people don't even want better for their children than what they have themselves. When I think of the sex, I didn't grow up impoverished. I grew up humble, but I didn't grow up impoverished like that. Even in that, though, when Andre's father and I, would reflect and we would talk about what we wanted for Andre, the sacrifices that were made, and neither one of us grew up poor, but it's like we want better for him. We absolutely positively want better for him. We want him to be better than us individually or collectively. And everything that we do is for that purpose. You know what I mean? So
absolutely.
It's
And without getting too clinical and stuff like that, you touched on some very excellent points, Dr. Pitts. And I don't know if you ever heard of the term post-traumatic slave syndrome, which it's kind of funny because, our diagnosis of the week is PTSD, but post-traumatic slave syndrome. They talked about it yesterday during the conference.
They sure did. Go ahead.
Exactly, and post-traumatic slave syndrome, it touches on everything you were talking about, how these years and decades and generations of African Americans being subjected to racism, torture, trauma, and they have scientific studies that show trauma can be genetically passed down to your children. And when we talk, and that was a very sad story about your student. That I've heard stories similar to that before, being in this field, and it's very sad that, parents look to their children to be adults and make adult decisions. And part of that kind of ties into what I was talking about earlier with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Oftentimes, these parents who live in these underserved areas and low-income areas, either they have children in order to feel unconditional love, they have children because it's a bill, they have children because they need help around the house, or they need somebody to go to work. So, oftentimes, and a lot of the times, these parents who have these children didn't have parents themselves, or if they did have parents, they were in dysfunctional homes. They saw high levels of trauma, drug use, incarceration, domestic violence. So they're just doing exactly what they've seen. And unless you're exposed to something different, it's very hard to break those cycles. But as a collective, we have to be able to help our brothers and sisters break these cycles and not just, turn a blind eye to it.
Right. I have a question real quick while we're on that topic, and I think it goes back to the slave mentality, like Ronnie just said, post-traumatic slave syndrome. And you guys may have experienced as well, but growing up younger, high school, up to college, wherever, there seems like there's always this thing about if it's an African-American kid and they come from a family who is not even, I wouldn't say wealthy, but just doing well for themselves as a family, and then they get teased because of that. And it's almost like you're not supposed to reach a certain level if you're African-American. It's cool to stay, in the lower class because, like you said, that slave, PTSD, PTSS that you mentioned is real, because why would you not want your parents to be at a position in life where they can provide for you? Why would you want your family to stay at a certain lower class if you have the ability to reach higher? And I think that's just something that is mentally wrong with a lot of African Americans. And it's like it's the cool thing to grow up in poverty. And I think that's
it's almost like it entitles you to your black card. Are you kidding me? Like what?
Yeah.
If I'm not poor, I'm not black. Get the heck out of here.
Exactly.
Yep. And we call that trauma bonding.
Yeah. Gail King, there was a powerful session yesterday during our women's conference on Black Lives Matter, and it was Bishop T.D. Jakes, Gail King, Mayor Keisha Lance Bottoms, the young lady from CNN. I can't remember her name. Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm totally drawing a blank on her name. Please forgive me. But a sister from the West Coast, who they were talking about. There were two series, because there was one with Van Jones specifically on Black Lives Matter, but in the session that Bishop did with the women of color, they were talking about that mindset. And one of the things that Gail King said was, a parent didn't know, she was born in Turkey. And she lived in Turkey up until the 6th grade, which is when she came to the United States. And she said, literally, all through her youth, she was teased and made fun of, and her blackness, if you will, was questioned because she talked funny. And I've said on previous shows, literally my whole life, I have, been ridiculed and made fun of, and my blackness has been questioned. I was raised in a home, though, where slang wasn't permitted. I was raised in a home where I was required to speak correctly. I was raised in a home, and let me just preface it by saying to our listeners, my grandfather had an 8th grade education, and my grandmother had a 10th grade education. And my mom was one of 11 children, and the 2 oldest boys didn't complete high school either. However, my grandparents put an exorbitant amount of value on education, as did my mother and my stepfather and the rest of my aunts and uncles. So I didn't have a choice. And I will tell you now, I'm about to be 53 in a couple of weeks. I'm not permitted to use slang in my parents' home. It's against the rules. And if I do, they're looking at me like, excuse you, ma'am, all this money we put out for this education, are you kidding me right now? And don't let me say ain't. Ain't's a cuss word in my parents' house. It's a cuss word. I say ain't just, yeah, it's a mindset, and I truly believe that it is the residual effects of slavery, and it needs to be addressed. And you know, we could this is a whole nother show, right? There's another 2, 3, 4 shows. We could stay on this for days and days and days. But we know that it will continue to come up because, you know, we're covering all athletic seasons on House Talk Pregame, and you know, we are communicating with Black and brown people and the dominant culture too, but our emphasis is on educating, empowering, and liberating our own people. And, you know, we have some powerful discussions here, folks. We know you care about these discussions. We're confident that you are nodding your head and shaking and co-signing or disagreeing with some of the things that we're saying. And we want to hear from you. We want you to join the conversation. And you can do that by calling 515-605-9744, or you can email us at htpregame@gmail.com. You can also download the HSRN app so you can listen anywhere by visiting the App Store or Google Play. And all you have to do is search Heritage Sports Radio, hit the download button. You can also help us to keep these conversations growing by your sponsorship with a gift in whatever amount you can afford by visiting drlaurendpitts.com and clicking on the donate button, or you can email us at htpregame@gmail.com to receive a sponsorship packet. Now, we got to get going because we, you know, like I said, we could spend 3, 4, 5 more shows and so on talking about at all of that. But what we do every week here on Pregame is we offer a diagnosis of the week. And the reason why we do that is because we know that mental illness is a stigma in Black and brown communities all over the nation and across the world. So we want to make sure that we are remaining diligent in informing our listening audience about the importance of mental wellness and just bringing some things to mind that may pertain to you or to someone that you love and care about. So our diagnosis for the week this week is PTSD, and we're actually doing a play on words, and Jared will speak to that in a few. But PTSD in the clinical sense, about 1 in 4 children in the general population will experience a traumatic event before the age of 16. So I wanted to highlight that because, of course, as scholar athletes, you know, we are looking at kids as well as, you know, young adults in college and then on over into our professional athletes. Community-based studies reveal a lifetime prevalence of post-traumatic stress disorder, i.e. PTSD, of approximately 8% in the United States, according to the American Psychiatric Association. However, the prevalence of trauma exposure and PTSD in special populations, i.e. people of color, such as those in the child welfare system, juvenile justice, hospitalized children, and in economically depressed areas, and particularly among impoverished ethnic minorities, is PTSD is estimated to be much, much higher. We believe that it is extremely important to make folks aware of what this looks like, because my argument for many, many years has been, when you look at the disproportionate diagnoses of children of color with ADHD and ADD, I question whether or not it's really ADHD or ADD, or is it PTSD? Because when you look at our communities, the visceral responses that we see in children that are diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, and for those that have sensory input challenges, a lot of that behavior mimics that of PTSD. And those behaviors can, depending on the stimulus in the environment, it can evoke a traumatic response that to a teacher, it may look like, oh, the kid is bouncing off the walls, when in actuality, the noise or being yelled at or corrected or belittled or degraded or demeaned, because we know that happens to children of color in the learning environment, that could be evoking a traumatic response in them because the child actually has post-traumatic stress disorder. Many people experience very stressful or traumatic events in their lives. And for us as people of color, it would appear that being Black is a traumatic experience these days, and has been for generations. Traumatic events include, I'm paraphrasing, traumatic events include being born Black or brown, being in an accident, seeing a violent death, being attacked, being physically or sexually abused, or seeing a dangerous fight. See them all the time. Anyone who experiences a very stressful or traumatic event can develop PTSD. Ronnie is going to briefly share with you some things that you can do if this is you, or if you think it may be you. Ronnie?
Thank you, Dr. Pitts. And that was a great point, Dr. Pitts, talking about children who are mistakenly diagnosed with ADHD or ADD, or even oppositional defiance disorder in place of PTSD. And just real quick before I get into some treatments and coping skills, some of the signs and symptoms, if you notice these in any children, just something to keep an eye out for. Typically, children who have experienced PTSD, some of the symptoms they might experience are reliving the event over and over, have nightmares or sleep problems, become very upset when something causes memories of the event, so basically being triggered by something that's related to the event, lack of positive emotions, intense ongoing fear or sadness. One of the biggest ones, and this is typically also tied with depression too, kids who experience PTSD or depression as well are oftentimes irritable or angry. Most oftentimes kids aren't necessarily sad like we think of when we think of depression and things like that. Most children are irritable or very angry. And they're also constantly looking for possible threats and being easily startled. So with that being said, so if you're an adult or, somebody who has experienced PTSD or currently going through PTSD, one of the first things that might often come to mind is medications. And some of the medications that are prescribed to patients suffering from PTSD are what we call selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors, or SSRIs. And basically what those are medications that typically are a class of antidepressants that work by increasing the level of serotonin, which is one of the feel-good hormones in our brain, increasing that and stimulating that more. So medication is always a route you can take for PTSD if it is severe or reoccurring. In therapy, me and Dr. Pitts always talk about, going to seek counseling and things like that. And I'm going to talk to you real quick about a technique we use in mental health called CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is basically a technique we use to change our thought patterns, our conscious and unconscious thoughts, beliefs, and our behaviors and attitudes. Some of the techniques we use in CBT are, of course, journaling. And when you do journaling, that's kind of like for self-reflecting and identifying those triggers and things like that can trigger your PTSD. Relaxed breathing, which is, kind of like the same hand with meditation and mindfulness. And getting deeper into CBT, we call unraveling cognitive distortions, or another way of saying that is identifying harmful or negative automatic thoughts. So, for example, if you believe I'll give an example that we often use for CBT. If you believe you must have a high-paying job to be respectable, and then you turn around and lose that high-paying job, you might feel bad for yourself or might feel you're not being respected. What we do with that is what we call cognitive restructuring. So we'll take that example, if somebody presents that example to us, and we'll challenge that thought by thinking of other ways for being what they feel like, what can I do to be respectable, or what can I do to change this thought, to start to eliminate those harmful and negative automatic thoughts. For children who suffer from PTSD, there's a specific CBT, what we call trauma-focused CBT, which is exactly what it says. The trauma or the event that occurred for that child is more focused in that, and those are very intensive sessions with a therapist or a psychiatrist, whatever the case may be. And then, of course, you have support groups, finding support groups and friends, exercising, and another one, which we call aromatherapy, which is basically where you have scents that go off in your room like lavender, orange, sage, or peppermint. Those are all treatments and coping skills you can use with PTSD. Back to you, Dr. Fitz.
So I'm so glad you brought that up, because I actually started my TSCBT certification training at the end of June. And I actually will finish, the second week in November, and we'll be going for my national certification for TFCBT as well. So I'm so glad you brought that up. It's intense. It is really.
I just got a certificate for TFCBT through University of South Carolina.
Nice. It's real though, right? It is.
It's very real.
It's powerful, and what I really appreciate too is that now I'm a part of a TFCBT treatment team, and we meet every Monday from 12 to 1, and we present on our cases, and it is just such a phenomenal network of TFCBT clinicians that really just gives us so much insight on how to address children. And TFCBT, the recommendation is that it can be used all the way up until a child is 17. So that certainly covers our high school scholar athletes. In addition to that, though, the techniques are extraordinary, and really, in part, the methods that we use can be used on adults and what have you too. You just have to modify them to a degree. But the different skills that we teach to be able to address the trauma, it's just absolutely phenomenal. So we're going to keep it moving. Jared, you want to go ahead and rock out get us started on these shout outs so that we can get into this discussion. We've been on a roll today, folks.
Right, I know, but we still can't forget the HBCU, so we definitely got to shout those out. My two shout outs. The first one is West Virginia State University. That was founded in 1891, and it was one of the original 19 land-grant colleges and universities established by the Second Morrill Act of 1890. And that act evolved as a diverse and inclusive campus. Following desegregation, West Virginia State University, the student population started to have an increase in Caucasian students. And in 2017, the statistics showed that West Virginia State was 75% white and only 8% African American. So that kind of hits on what Ronnie was talking about with a lot of these schools being gentrified and things like that. And it sits on land that was once occupied by mound builder Native Americans, and that land also was used as a plantation using enslaved labor. Some quick facts about these schools, some notable alumni as well I'll get into. Booker T. Washington spoke at the first commitments exercise at the school. And then in 1939, West Virginia State University became the first of 6 HBCUs to be authorized by the Civil Aeronautics Authority to establish an aviation program. And that program that they had prepared many African-American pilots to the U.S. Army Air Corps in World War II. A notable alumni, Harry Elizabeth Byrd. She's the first African American to serve in the Wyoming legislature. Antoine Fuqua, I believe is how you pronounce it. He's a writer and director, and a lot of you guys probably seen the movie, probably a lot of you guys' favorite movie, Training Day. He wrote Training Day.
Yep.
And then Southwestern Christian, that's big. Then Southwestern Christian College is my second school, and that was founded in 1948. The fourth president of the school was Dr. Jack Evans, and he was the first black and longest-serving president in the school's history from 1967 to 2016. And something that's real interesting, and this is the first on the shout-outs, this is actually a HBCU that competes in the National Junior College Athletic Association. So this is a junior college, but it's HBCU, which I've never heard of. And then, and then the alumni, it wasn't anybody that's very notable, but Michael Matthew is an Olympic athlete in track from the Bahamas. And then Molisi Kite Asante, he's a professor in the Department of Afroecology at Temple University. So definitely some interesting facts I never knew. You guys can get the next one.
So I want to say first about West Virginia State. I giggled when you said that because, what'd you say, 75% white? So one of my exes actually graduated from West Virginia and went there on a basketball scholarship. And when he and I were still dating, we went to West Virginia to see his son. I kid y'all not. I was in freaking Walmart hunting for black people. I'm like, yo, are there people here?
Right.
My God. And I told him, I was like, yo, you sure this is an HBCU? And he was like, girl, shut up. I was like, no, for real. Yeah. Where? We were the only black people in the restaurant that we dined in for dinner. I kid you not. I was in West Virginia hunting for black folks.
That's crazy.
It was just nuts. So I was going to shout out two, but in the instance of time, I'm just going to shout out one. Tuskegee University, founded in 1881 in Tuskegee, Alabama. And, you know, everybody, I would imagine, knows something about Tuskegee. But George Washington Carver, among the notable alum, the most prominent black scientist of the early 20th century. He developed 300 products from peanuts, flour, paste, paper, wall board, wood stains, soap, shaving cream, skin lotion. Like, okay, wow, all with peanuts, who knew? The Tuskegee Airmen, which was the first black military aviators in the U.S. Army Air Force, a precursor of the U.S. Air Force, trained at the Tuskegee Army Airfield in Alabama. They flew more than 15,000 individual sorties in Europe and North Africa during World War II. And then Frank Walker was a former NFL cornerback drafted by the New York Giants in the 6th round of the 2003 draft. Drayton Florence, former NFL cornerback drafted by San Diego Chargers in the 2nd round of the 2003 draft. Demetri Patterson, former NFL cornerback. They're kicking out cornerbacks at Tuskegee. NFL cornerback signed by the Washington football team, formerly the Washington Redskins, as an undrafted free agent in 2005. Calvin Russell, former NFL wide receiver, signed by the Green Bay Packers as an undrafted free agent in 2008. And check this out, y'all. Lionel Richie, Keenan Ivory Wayans, Ricky Smiley, Tom Joyner, Betty Shabazz, Richard T. Jones, who's the dude that plays Mike in Why Did I Get Married and Why Did I Get Married To, and rapper Rich Boy. All graduated from Tuskegee. I'm like, well, all right.
Wow. Wow. That's dope.
I was like, who knew? Yeah, I was excited. I'm like, wow, this is good stuff. This is good stuff.
Tuskegee should never run into financial problems.
You better
exactly. Goes back to
they should never, ever have to worry about that.
Yeah.
Goes back to the beginning of the show, what we said.
Right. Who you have, Ronnie?
All right, so I'm going to do my two real quick. So the first one I have is Savannah State University, located, of course, in Savannah, Georgia. Founded in 1890, Savannah State is the oldest public historically black college or university in the state of Georgia and the oldest institution of higher learning in the city of Savannah. Savannah State was the first institution of higher education in the state of Georgia to offer a bachelor's degree in Homeland Security and Emergency Management, and the second in the state to offer a bachelor's degree in Forensic Science. Savannah State is also involved in a lot of space study and things like that. They've sent cutting-edge genetic material from campus laboratories to the International Space Station in 2014. They also hold 2 patents that they earned in 2016. One allows for the collection and harvest of organic material necessary for long-distance space travel. The other is a new chemical that has implications for treating Alzheimer's, ALS, and dementia. Some notable alumni of Savannah State are, of course, Black America's favorite uncle, Shannon Sharp, who is a Pro Football Hall of Famer, played tight end for the Denver Broncos and Baltimore Ravens. And then Taj Mowry, who is the younger brother of Tia and Tamara Mowry from the show Sister Sister.
Nice.
And then my second school is South Carolina State University, founded in 1896, located in Orangeburg, South Carolina. A couple facts about them. So after World War II, the state legislature created a graduate program and a law school at South Carolina State University to prevent black students from enrolling in the University of South Carolina's graduate and legal education programs. The legislature also dramatically increased funding at the college in an effort to make separate but equal a reality in higher education in South Carolina. SC State also has over 40 former football players who have played in the NFL, including Pro Football Hall of Famer Deacon Jones. And just recently, Darius Leonard, who Dr. Pitch is a teammate of your hometown hero, Jonathan Taylor. He was drafted in the second round of the 2018 NFL draft by the Colts. Harry Carson and Donnie Shell, who is a current 2020 Pro Football Hall of Fame nominee. And alumni for SC State includes James Clybourne, who is a Democratic member of the House of Representatives, and Andrew Hugini Jr., I hope I said his last name right, forgive me if I didn't, who is the current president of Alabama A&M University. Nice. So shout out to Savannah State and South Carolina State.
Nice.
Yeah, those are some good shout-outs right there.
Indeed. All right, Jared.
Yeah, let's get into the show. We're going to give you a powerful 30 minutes. You know, we gave you a I don't think.
You better see y'all quick.
We're in a hurry up offense right now, but we're gonna get in the end zone. So the title today is Rehabilitation and My Plan B Sounds Great. Now, rehabilitation, a lot of you guys think of strictly as you get injured, tear your ACL, you break a wrist, things like that. You rehabilitate with athletic training and things like that. So we're going to talk about it in a deeper sense and talk about the mental aspect of rehabilitation. And also the diagnosis of the week was PTSD, like Ronnie and Dr. Lauren Pitts spoke about. But I believe it was Ronnie who coined the phrase some weeks ago, post-traumatic sports derailment. So we're going to talk about that and do some of our athletes actually suffer from PTSD once they leave the sport. So we're going to dive into that. And, you know, one of the major things for me when I transitioned from the game, you know, I didn't think of PTSD or anything like that until Ronnie had mentioned it before. But there is some traumatic experiences that you can have as an athlete, whether it is getting a concussion and worrying about having CTE down the line, or just being detached from something that you love to do for so many years. And that can cause a traumatic experience as well within yourself or within your family. So one of the things we want to talk about first is the injuries as a part of the rehabilitation. And, you know, I experienced some injuries and things like that, but I think we want to focus a little bit more on the mental part as far as concussions and how that affects us mentally once we leave the game and how can we overcome that. Do you guys agree? Dr. Pitts and Ronnie?
I want to go first. All right,
got it.
Take it away, Dr. Pitts.
Y'all know, you already know where I'm going. You know my heart broke. My baby is hurt. And I am not kidding y'all when I say I have been crying all week. I cried. You would think that I was a relative of Dakota Prescott. I cried, and I'm talking booty crying. You hear me? I cried and cried and cried and cried and cried. My heart broke. I'm like, oh my God. And when he was biting that tongue, I was done. And I kid you not, from Sunday, I was okay yesterday, and I was okay for the majority of Thursday, with God as my witness. Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, every time I would think about it, or I got the Cowboys app, I have the Cowboys app on my phone, so I was just checking back, and then my fiance sent me a picture of him, and I was crying. I don't know what it is about this, and I'm saying this with the utmost sincerity of heart. I don't know what it is about this young man, but literally from the day he took over from Tony Romo, he had my heart. And he had my heart in a maternal way. You know, as the world knows, he lost his mother to cancer. And, you know, this is Breast Cancer Awareness Month. And just shout outs to all of the cancer survivors and those that are fighting. And we certainly give honor to those that have lost their lives. But this young man literally just gripped my heart. And I just love him. I love him. I love him. I love him. And I have been praying for him because it was just, 3 weeks or so ago that he disclosed, or right before the season started, when he disclosed the challenges that he was having with his mental wellness in, you know, losing his older brother, Jay, so tragically and what have you. And that was the first thing that came to mind. I was like, oh, my God. I am so thankful that he is in good spirits and that people are rallying around him, because this sport that he loves so much, it's for the time being, for him to contribute in the capacity that he normally would. That shifted for him. And how can that not affect you? How can it not? Right. I was so happy when I was listening to Mike McCarthy's press conference, when he said that, you know, they are going to rally around him and give him all the support that he needs, and they're going to get innovative. They're going to get innovative in keeping him engaged and involved. To our show, though, what does that look like for those scholar athletes or those athletes that don't have the level of support that Dak has?
Right.
Yeah. Well, first of all, I agree with this. I just want to answer that question real quick. You know, I'm glad that Mike McCarthy said he's going to support Dak Prescott, but I mean, let's be real. How much more did that man got to prove in order to get a long-term contract from Jerry Jones?
It's the truth. Jerry, if you're listening, pay my baby.
And, you know, I mean, they can support him all they want to, and, you know, make sure he's got the best doctors and best rehab specialists and all that. Hey. And that was sad. I've had a teammate break and dislocate their ankle that way, and that's not a pretty sight to see in person or on the TV when it happened to Dak Prescott. Yeah. But it just goes to show you, Dak is a phenomenal athlete, black or white. He is a phenomenal athlete. And it just goes to show you how much more he has to do in order to get a quarter of the payment. I mean, Tony Romo had one playoff visit in, I think, the 15 years, 15 years he was the quarterback there. And that man got contract after contract after contract. And Dak done took Dallas to he done got him 2 divisional titles, took him to the playoffs twice. Yep. And, I mean, the man can't even get, you know, he gets franchise tagged. And, you know, he bet on himself, and unfortunately the team won that bet. But I just hope that, you know, when he comes back next year or whenever he comes back, that, you know, he comes back better than ever. And, you know, honestly, I hope he leaves Dallas and goes somewhere where he can get, you know, the fair treatment and the pay he deserves, because the man deserves to get paid, you know.
His records, I mean, his stats were, like, vicious. His stats coming into that game, vicious. He was doing it during, and I don't care. You gonna throw more interceptions when you airing that ball out like he's been doing. Exactly. I don't give a rat's behind about that. Exactly. He was on track to continue to break records, and he was doing the darn thing. Jerry Jones, pay my baby. Pay my baby.
And then, we were on that topic of Dak, you know, injuring himself and things like that, and the whole mental aspect of it and CTE. I was thinking about Aaron Hernandez. I know a lot of people probably saw the documentary on Netflix. I mean, It was a great documentary. It gave a lot of insight. But another thing with the rehabilitation of our athletes, we don't need to wait until they're in a position where they are off the field, because in that documentary, there was something that happened. I can't remember the exact situation, but it was something that happened where the Patriots kind of knew that something was going on, but they still didn't step in to help them. And I think while you have these athletes within that organization, that college, that professional team, the rehabilitation should start before it's even needed. It should be a preventative measure to help our athletes. Exactly. Because, it's a good thing that and it's a good thing that Prescott is in good spirits, because, who's to say if he didn't have that support system, what would happen to him? I mean, let's I'm not wishing it on anybody, but his mother, that's been since college. And then this year his brother passes from suicide. Yep. Who's to say if he didn't have a support system? Yeah, he would be very vulnerable. You know what I mean? And then also the financial part comes into it, like Ronnie was talking about, his contract. He didn't get the contract he wanted, so he also may be thinking in his mind, financially, he won't be able to take care of himself and his family for generations, as opposed to if he did have that contract. So I think that it's good they're doing innovative things to step in, because I believe he needs to be rehabilitated right now instead of, worst case scenario, his career ended early. And hopefully it's not, but that's the reality of it. So I think that's just something that is very important. And, while we're on the topic of rehabilitation, and we spoke about injuries, physical injuries, but we really need to focus a lot on rehabilitating the mind. And, some things that I believe can help, which have helped me, is, looking at yourself as someone greater than what you once were, what you believed you were, what your coaches thought you were on the field. Opening up doors to reading more, meditating, exploring other opportunities. If it's going for a walk, just doing things that give you peace mentally, I think are some of the things that really help our athletes transition successfully and open up that door to, the other person that they are off of that athletic field.
I want to read something to you guys real quick, and I want your reaction, because I was blown, because I think that it's something that probably happens perhaps more than we realize. And I sort of think that it alludes to, Ronnie, what you shared about 30-some concussions. I read an article called The Darker Side of Sports, Career-Ending Athletic Injuries and Adjusting to Life Afterwards. And the article starts out with a female athlete who had a back injury, from what I understand, that was unsports related. But she was playing volleyball. She was on the volleyball team at her university, and she got hit in the head with the ball. It said the ball smacked her right temple instead of her forearms, whipping her head around and causing her to fall and black out for a few seconds. She said, I knew that I had a concussion immediately, but I didn't tell anyone. I sat out for one play, then told the team I was fine to play, and continued in the drill. I immediately got hit in the head again. Then I knew I was definitely concussed. She continued to play for the next few days until the pain became unbearable. She tried sitting out for a month, but it wasn't enough. The injury eventually ended her volleyball career. The concussion affected everything about me, she said, my personality and my mood. I had panic disorder, severe depression, and anxiety. I was colorblind, had a stutter. I had difficulty writing and reading, and was cognitively functioning at the level of a 7-year-old.
My God. That's crazy.
But y'all love your sports. Y'all will play at all costs. Y'all will shake it off. I'm good. But what did I say 2-3 shows ago? At what cost?
You're absolutely right. Yeah. I mean, God, prayers for her, and as she continues to move through this life. That's sad. But talking about concussions, I've shared several times with Jared and Dr. Pitts, and I think I shared it on the show the first episode. from the age of 8 to 22, I probably know I had well over 30 concussions at the easiest, you know. But we used to call them getting your bell rung, or you just hit somebody really hard. And you know, CTE is a concern of mine. You know, I like to pray and think that, you know, as I get older, you know, I still have, you know, control over my mind, my thoughts, my actions, and, you know, my impulses. I pray I continue to have control over those. I pray that as I get older, I don't start to, you know, have memory lapses or, you know, become more irritable or, you know, forgetful. Sometimes I laugh and joke, and I say I look at my dad who played football in the 70s. You know, when football was, you know, that was football back then, you know. There was no such thing as a concussion. There was, you got knocked out, you got some smelling salt, and you got back in the game. You know, he's turning 64 this year on New Year's Eve, and, you know, he still has his mind. So, you know, I'm praying that, you know, about you know, if I'm, God willing, I see 64, you know, I'll still have my mind as well. But it is a concern of mine. And I actually had a teammate in high school who, Jared, you've heard the term friendly fire when, you know, two teammates run into each other on defense. He actually had a brain bleed during a game in high school where he was trying to tackle the running back, and he was a linebacker, and he ran into our safety. The running back had just slipped and fell, so they ran into each other. And he didn't come out. I never forget it. He didn't come out, but you could tell he was messed up. You know, we're asking him, like, hey, you all right? And he was like, yeah, I'm good. And then the very next play, pancaked. And, you know, that was kind of like, you know, he was about maybe 6'1", about 220. So, you know, he was decent size and ended up getting pancaked. And when he got pancaked, the ref said he saw just the whites of his eyes, and that was it.
Oh, wow.
And he ended up being in the hospital for, I think, 4 months. He had a brain bleed. And he could never play football again, even though, God willing, he was actually cleared to play football again 2 years later. But he just never got back into it. And I actually talked to him. I haven't talked to him in a while, but I did talk to him last year. And he said he still does get reoccurring headaches. You know, sometimes he gets severe migraines now. But for the most part, he says, you know, he feels like he has, you know, good control over his mind and his thoughts. But yeah, it is a concern of mine.
Now, with it being a concern, would you, you know, if you have a son, would you want him to play? And if he does play, would you want him to play one of the more physical positions, offense, defensive line, linebacker?
That's a good question. You know, me and my wife have talked about that before, and, you know, she always said, like, well, I know if we have a son, I know you're going to make him play football. And, you know, believe it or not, you know, my dad played football when he was in high school, and unfortunately his career was cut short to injuries. But he never forced football on me. And like I said a couple shows ago, I started playing football because, you know, the kids in class were playing football, and they were, you know, bullying me. So, you know, I saw it as a way to get back at them. If we were to have a son and he wanted to play football, I wouldn't be opposed to it. You know, I would definitely, and I don't think even if he wanted to start at a young age, let's say maybe 8 or 9, I don't think I would try to have an age-appropriate conversation about the risk and, you know, the consequences of playing football, but I wouldn't necessarily stop him. And if he did have some size to him where he would play O-line or D-line or you know, position like linebacker, you know, I would definitely make sure he is, you know, trained and, you know, educated enough to know the risk of playing, you know, a sport like football. But stopping him, my wife might have a different view about that. She might not be cool with it, but, you know, hey, I think football is the greatest sport, so if he wanted to do it, have at it. What about you, Jared?
Right. Yeah, I feel kind of the same. I mean, I started playing when I was 6 years old, started playing football. And it's funny because at that young age, I never really experienced any pain after a game. I mean, you were hitting, but I didn't notice any of the effects from it until maybe like in high school. You start to really feel the effects of it, you know, the day after a game. But I wouldn't shy away from it. I wouldn't tell them no to any sport. But just because the football is more violent, I still would encourage them if that's what they want to do. But like you said, I would make sure they know what they're doing, and, you know, they're still getting the proper treatment. You know, I probably would, you know, make sure that after games they get the proper treatment. They go to chiropractors. They, you know, are getting their body taken care of by a professional. I think that's one of the big things too. Yeah, exactly. I think that's smart. And, if they don't want to play, hey, I'm not going to be mad. But I definitely won't stop them because of the injury. Because the volleyball, like Dr. Pitt said, I never would have thought somebody got a concussion from volleyball, at that, serious of a concussion. So any sport you can get hurt, but it's just all about having a support system behind that athlete in the situation that they do get hurt, because injuries happen, and doing your best to prevent it, within your control. So that's my take on it and things like that. And another thing, like a lot of times the injuries lead to having to go through rehabilitation physically, possibly going to talk to a psychiatrist or something like that, which also leads into the Plan B and finding your Plan B. And in the book from Cleesa Lopez that I wrote, I titled the chapter My Plan B Sounds Great. And I emphasize sounds because as a young kid growing up, we're often told by our coaches, even sometimes parents, have a plan B, have a plan B, have a plan B, and that's emphasized, but it's never emphasized to actually start acting on that plan B. And what's your guys' take on the difference between saying you want to be something, but actually taking the time and prioritizing your time to make sure that you do have a plan B in case, you do have a concussion and you can't play anymore?
I want to chime in on that, and I want to put a little twist on this. I think that whether it's a career-ending injury by force, or in the example that Ronnie gave where the gentleman was cleared after 2 years to play, but just decided not to go back, I believe, and here's the twist, I believe that because athletes, whether male or female, are so wholeheartedly committed to your athletic trajectory, I think that when the decision is made for the athlete to not be able to play anymore, or the time ends because of not wanting to sustain any more injury or because of age or whatever, I believe in many, many cases what happens is traumatic grief. And we know clinically that, traumatic grief is typically identified when there's been a death of some sort, or perhaps a loss of limb or something of that nature. But when we consider the level of passion that scholar athletes and professional athletes have, hence why suicide rate is so high among professional athletes, I think that we have to take into consideration that many of you may experience traumatic grief. So I believe that Plan B, a proactive measure for a Plan B, should include mental wellness care and self-care that involves a mental health practitioner. And let me clarify something. Back in the days of old, people were said to go see psychiatrists. In today's time, psychiatrists are primarily medication managers. They will do initial screening. They have some discussion when clients go in for med checks. But for the most part, psychiatrists today aren't providing psychotherapy. They're just managing medication. In order for one to receive appropriate care from a mental health practitioner, they need to see a mental health counselor, a licensed clinical social worker. They need to see a couple marriage and family therapists. They need to see someone that a psychologist, someone that specializes in various forms of psychotherapy and utilizing an integrative approach to do so. I think that that's paramount. I think that the Plan B should always consider that proactive line item of addressing one's mental wellness as it relates to the separation anxiety and distress that can come from no longer being able to engage in the sport that you love so much.
Now, with the mental piece, with both you guys being in that field, I know you guys have mentioned it was a career diagnosis. I forgot what it was, but that was kind of separate from actually sitting down with somebody to talk to them about, the mental health. For a lot of our athletes coming out of college, I mean, nobody knows anyone who's in that field sometimes. So what would you say to them as far as getting started in that immediately after college? And some people think of it as, one of the things is, okay, in the culture, we spoke about how, it's not masculine, but also financially. A lot of people think, I can't pay or afford a therapist. So what would you say to those people?
So first and foremost, most, if not all, institutions of higher learning have some sort of wellness center on campus. As we discussed previously, it might not be the case in junior college, but certainly the colleges and universities have centers on campus with at least a couple of mental health practitioners on their staff. So the insurance, we take insurance for those who don't have insurance, which, goodness gracious, at this stage of the game, everybody should have insurance. But for those who don't have insurance, I, for one, as far as private practice goes for my coaching and empowerment, I can do a sliding scale. I need to put food on the table, but I'm not hurting for money. So for me, it's more important to provide the care and work within the confines of people's budgets than to not provide the service. For me, it's about how can I help this person to get well. The money always comes. I'm not tripping off the money. I want folk to be well. And then the other thing they can do is you can always do a Google search and literally just you can go to AAMFT.org and search for a clinician in your area. It's the same thing with mental health counselors. Google, whether you want to. I am totally, I encourage going with mental health practitioners that provide services through a systemic lens, because mental health doesn't just affect the individual. It affects everybody that's connected to the person. Ronnie, you have any additional resources that you want to add that could be helpful?
The only resources that come to mind, you said Google, Psychology Today, as I mentioned in one of the earlier episodes. Psychology Today has filters. You can break it down by zip code, state, city, whatever the case may be. And typically they'll have pictures of the therapist, psychiatrist, whatever the case may be, on there. And that was a very great point, Dr. Pitts, about differentiating that when people talk about mental health and going to seek counseling. Oftentimes, the stereotype is, I don't want to go see a psychiatrist. Dr. Pitts is absolutely right. Psychiatrists, typically all they want to know is how much medication you need and when you're coming back to see me. And then I wanted to plant this seed real quick, talking about Plan Bs. We might not be able to get to talk about it today, but hopefully we can touch on it at the beginning of next episode. But I want to plant this seed real quick for our listeners and Jared and Dr. Pitts to ponder on. So when we talk about Plan Bs, I was listening to another podcast a couple months ago by a former NFL player, and it was during draft season and whatnot. And they made a very interesting point when it comes to, they weren't necessarily talking about Plan Bs, but they made a very interesting point. And they said, typically the NFL, when they go to recruit, college players and things like that, they might not openly speak on it, but one of the things they're looking for are players who need the NFL, who need them. And if you think about it, that kind of goes against having a Plan B. They kind of pride themselves off of finding athletes who need the NFL, for them to be a savior to them, for they can have financial freedom and things like that. Exactly. And I know that right there can be a conversation within itself, but I just want to plant that seed for our listeners to think about, when we think about having a plan B, and kind of touching on last week's conversation about, education and things like that. Well, part of having that plan B is having an educational plan, having, a support system and a group of friends around you who all have the collective mindset, and also, getting that mental health support. And typically when I talk to people, my age and former student athletes about mental health and things like that, I ask them, what are some things that you think about when you hear mental health and therapy and things like that? And I try and dispel a lot of the myths and a lot of the things they've heard in the past, typically where people think that, mental health is nothing but psychiatrists and you sit on a couch and you lay down and you talk about your problems. You can go to a therapist for a wide range of issues. It doesn't necessarily have to be mental health. It can be it can be marital things, could be job things, could be, personal things, family things. You can go to a therapist and talk to them about a wide range of things. But definitely, want to talk about that next week with, how, professional sports prey. I guess you can say prey on athletes who need them, as opposed to a student athlete who gets drafted into the NFL or NBA, whatever the case may be, and has a plan B who doesn't necessarily need the sport, but they do it because they love it, And I think when you get to that level of professional sports, they want you to need it as opposed to just loving it.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that it's so important, and I will say this, folks, as it relates to my private practice, I am positioned deliberately within the realm of empowerment coaching because I want to be able to reach a broader base. So, obviously I have the formal education and training and all of that, as a couple marriage and family therapy. However, I believe that the human mind can benefit from being empowered as well. So certainly, I can't help what my education is. I can't help what my frame of reference is. But that's why, I encourage people to reach out, to go to my website, to read about the individual coaching, the group coaching, the youth empowerment coaching that I do, that we do, that is, really emphasizing scholar athletes at the high school and collegiate level. Go to drlaurendpitts.com, check out the services that we offer. We do offer a sliding scale. We will work with you. We want to help you. We want you to be well. We wholeheartedly embrace and understand that the love and the passion that you have for whatever sport it is that you play. But we need you to be mentally well too. Your family needs you to be mentally well. Your community needs you to be mentally well. The nation needs you to be mentally well. And as we are wrapping up these last couple of minutes, look, folks, don't be fooled. There's a reason why both of the presidential candidates are going so hard for the African American vote. It's because we have the ability to change the tide of this election. We have the ability to change the game. I was blown when I listened to Snoop Dogg and Shaquille O'Neal and so many others talk about they hadn't voted for. It's like, are you kidding me? And I love them both. And I'm like, what in the ham fat is going on right now? Folks, you need to vote. You absolutely, positively need to vote. You need to don't fall into the trap of all this foolishness with these mail-in ballots conveniently not being produced and sent out. And that's one of the issues they're dealing with in Wisconsin and in Pennsylvania. Don't be caught up. Put your mask on, stand in that line, and get your buns to those polls and vote. Our lives literally do depend on it. Our democracy is at stake here. Justice and equality is at stake here. Vote, vote, vote. Look, folks, we want to hear from you. We need you to join us every Saturday at 11 a.m. on House Party Pregame. We want you to contribute to these discussions. We want to impact you. We want to impact your household, your community, the nation. We want to impact our HBCU campuses. We want you to join us right here at 11 a.m. next Saturday. We've got another powerful show. Until then, I am your empowerment coach and your international inspirational speaker, Dr. Lauren D. Pitts, and my two amazing co-hosts, Jared Johnston and Ronnie Ransom. Show them some love, y'all, before we wind up. Gentlemen, another great
show. You
show.
wanted us to show some love? I thought you were talking
Just
about.
say, show them some love.
I thought you were talking about the audience show some love. Nah, we appreciate you guys. And again, definitely for listening. We care about you guys as we care about the African American community overall. Go ahead, Ronnie. Before we go out.
Like Jared and Dr. Pitts said, thank you for everybody for listening. Continue to support us as we continue to support our community. Everybody be safe out there. Go vote and enjoy this beautiful weather if it's in your city.
All right. Next week, y'all.